I used to play a lot of hide and seek with my friends when we were young. A team version of the game though, so it was a little different. Instead of having a lone seeker who tags anybody, we would have a team of seekers and a team of hiders. And for the hiders to win, they would have to get to a certain checkpoint, and seekers would win if they tagged all the hiders. To tag one of the hiders, the seeker would have to two-hand touch their back, just like touch football. It started when we all formed our group on the block around 8 years old, all the way up until we were about 13. I lived in a cul-de-sac where there were 3 other houses besides mine, and kids my age lived in each one. There were also 4 other kids right outside the cul-de-sac around our age, so ever since I was little I had a group of neighboring friends. When we would play hide and seek, we would usually play in the cul-de-sac, since there was a lot of open space, trees, bushes, and each of the houses belonged to one of us, so we could use all the property space for the game as well. Plus, the cul-de-sac was right in front of our town's nature preserve park, so it also made it more fun to have the woods as an added hiding spot. It was 2008. I was 11 years old, a time and age we would still play hide and seek on Friday nights instead of going out to flirt with girls. We had only 6 of us this night, so we divided our 2 teams into 3s and split up. We were first to hide. The other team began counting down from 30, while we all went our separate ways to different houses. I ran to my next door neighbor's house and came up with a really creative idea. My friend had a green blanket outside on his patio sitting under a couple flower pots. I carefully moved the flower pots and took the green blanket, folding it over my body and crawling over to the bushes near the edge of the woods. Since our houses met the edge of the nature preserve, we could all choose if we wanted a back fence or not, and my next door neighbors chose not to have one, meaning the woods connected to some of our backyards. I heard the backyard gate open, so I quickly ran into the woods and knelt down under the green blanket. I would occasionally lift the blanket over my head to see who was there, and eventually I saw one of my friends creeping around the backyard, checking under the table and such. So while they were distracted, I waddled on my knees to the backyard of the next house over, where I could hear the commotion of one of my teammates getting caught. I lifted the blanket over my head to see what was going on, and I saw someone on the other team escorting my teammate back outside to the street. This was the perfect opportunity for me to run for it. I dropped the blanket completely and just looked around one last time before getting ready to make a break for it. Then, the most unexpected happened. The sound of a shoe on freshly fallen leaves and twigs snapped from right behind my ears, and before I could even turn around, I felt 2 hands grab my shoulders with a very strong and tight grip. I squealed in pain for a bit and screamed stop, managing to escape the grip and run for the checkpoint. I didn't make it to the checkpoint anyway though, because I ran into one of the seekers right at the backyard gates. We went out to the street where I found out that both of my teammates were already out, and the 2 other seekers were already waiting by the street. "Wait," I said. "If all of you guys are already out here, who was the one who found me in the woods?" I asked. They all looked at each other, seemingly confused. None of them owned up to it. They all swore they hadn't even gone into the woods. As I realized they were telling the truth, I felt my heart skip a few beats before pumping back up in a rapid beat, twice as fast as normal. When I told them that somebody was in the woods and grabbed me with force, they didn't believe me at first, but I convinced them. We all went to tell our parents, and the cops were called. Unfortunately for my neighbor friend, his parents put up a 4th fence wall, separating the woods to the backyard. We continued to play hide and seek and flashlight tag past this incident up until around the age of 13. Our parents just made us carry flashlights from now on and left all the backyard lights on. And of course, the woods were off limits. I'm happy to have such fond memories with friends as a young child, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that this was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. This happened when I was 10 years old. I lived in a small town in New York State that didn't have much going on at all. The house next door to mine was vacant for the longest time, until one day a moving truck pulled up in front, and a woman, a kid my age, and a toddler stepped out. Me and my dad had been sitting on the stoop talking, so we were able to go over and greet them right away. The mom seemed pretty normal, though there was something slightly off about her personality. My dad and the mom introduced me and the other boy my age to each other. He introduced himself as CJ, and then reached out his hand for a handshake, which for kids our age at the time was very weird. I shook his hand, and I remember both of our parents laughed. My dad ended up pressuring me on the spot to go hang out with CJ upstairs in my room. I wasn't against it, so I led him up to my room. I sat down on my bed, and he just stared at me blankly, creepily. I asked him if he wanted to play Mario Kart, and he didn't even know what that was. I showed him a few of my video games, and he said he doesn't like video games, so I suggested we play hide and seek outside. That he agreed to. I told him he could hide first to familiarize himself with the properties, while I gave him a 60-second head start. He ran into his new backyard, and I started counting down from 60. When it came time to find him, I found him in literally the most obvious place he could be. He was standing behind the chimney, a spot that I had to pass to get into the backyard. From this point on, I was starting to wonder if maybe this kid wasn't all there. After 10 minutes of an anticlimactic game of hide and seek, I said I had homework to do. He asked if he could come inside with me, and I didn't know what to say. Every excuse I came up with, he would find another way of asking to come inside. Eventually, however, he did leave me alone, and I went inside. Realistically, I had nothing to do. I just didn't like the kid and didn't want to further any kind of friendship with him. That night, something terrifying happened. I awoke to a thud at my bedside window. I sat up and lifted the window up. I was disturbed to see CJ's face at the upstairs window of the neighboring house. He leaned out his window and called out for me to come over and play hide and seek. I yelled over he's insane and told him to go back to sleep and leave me alone. I aggressively slammed my window shut, as well as the blind, and tried to go back to sleep. Two more times a rock or something was thrown at my window, but I ignored it. When it seemed to stop, I was relieved, and finally felt at ease. 10 minutes or so later, I heard a noise coming from below my window outside. It sounded like a bird was hopping around the ledge or something, possibly. The sound kept getting closer though, and then I heard a thud come from right below my window. I didn't know what to think. What if CJ was out there? Was he trying to climb up to my window? The thought of it was so disturbing it was almost comical. Then I heard the slightest creak of the floorboards near my bedroom door. I turned to face the doorway and screamed at the sight of CJ standing at my door in his pajamas. He said in a quiet voice, "Let's play hide and seek." My dad was in the room quicker than I could even get out of my bed. He was just as shocked and disturbed as I was. He angrily marched over to the new neighbor's house with CJ in his grip. I watched the whole thing through my window. He raised his voice quite a few times. It turned out CJ simply entered through an unlocked window downstairs. My dad got a restraining order against the woman and her son. Unfortunately, they weren't going anywhere though. For months after this incident, I would have to awkwardly avoid eye contact with the mother next door the few times I saw her. Strangely, I never once saw CJ outside of the house again. However, every single night for over a month, I would check outside my bedroom window across to the other house and see CJ just sitting by his window looking into mine with his creepy blank stare. It got to a point where I eventually left the blinds to that window closed 24/7, and eventually it stopped. CJ and his mom moved out less than a year later, and luckily I never saw them again. my early days after graduating college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to rent an apartment with someone else who I'd never met before. He'd become my roommate, and his name was Randall. At first, he seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much, but he had a heavy Spanish accent. The room I'd be getting was already furnished, and that was one of the appealing factors to this apartment. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in the corner, a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand in another corner of the room. There were a bunch of stuffed animals sitting on the dresser though, which I found a bit odd. Most notably, a big teddy bear facing the bed. When I asked Randall about the stuffed animals, he gave a really loud laugh and said his room had the same thing. He recommended I leave them be as to show respect to the landlord. I didn't really talk to Randall much that first day other than that. I spent most of my time unpacking my clothes and supplies and setting up my TV. When I was laying in the bed watching TV that night, I thought I heard something. It was a very brief noise, but it was definitely audible, and it sounded like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise and continued my show. The next day, Randall wasn't home all day. I didn't know if or where he worked, but I just assumed he was at work. That night, when I was in my room watching TV, I heard the front door open, and Randall walked through the hall to his room before shutting the door. A little later, I was getting changed into my pajamas when I heard the same sound from the night before. This time without the TV noise in the background, so I heard it much clearer. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what or where. It still didn't seem like a big deal, so I got into my bed and started reading my current book at the time, then went to sleep. The next day, I saw Randall when I came home after work, and he asked me what book I was reading. At first I didn't get the question, but then he said he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him in silence and confusion. I asked him how he knew I was reading a book, and he said in his heavy Spanish accent that he had to go into my room just to take something out that he left in there, and that's when he noticed the book. I asked him nicely not to go into my room anymore. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lock on the door, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home. That night, when I grabbed my book from under my bed, I stopped and wondered, how would he see my book if I had it under my bed? Thinking about this now creeped me out, and I was in no mood to read anymore. I looked around the room as I thought to myself, then I noticed that big teddy bear on the dresser again, how it was angled so perfectly to face me in the bed. Then I had a thought, a scary thought. I stood up and walked over to the bear, grabbed it, and looked closely into its eyes. I felt my heart skip a beat when I realized there was a camera in one of the eye holes. I threw the thing into the corner of the room and went to Randall's door and tried opening it. His door apparently had a lock because it wouldn't open, but I knew he was in there. I pounded on the door screaming his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light sneaking in through the bottom of the door go dark as I assumed he turned off the light. I went back to my room and called the landlord. I explained everything and told him I'm leaving right now, and I had a valid reason to void the contract. I packed the little amount of things I brought into my car and left that same night, never looking back. The landlord surprisingly never even came to me to collect the money for those few days I was there. Ever since that night, I have a phobia of stuffed bears. Like, I always have to turn them away so that they're not facing me. It's 2016. Our new neighbors invite our family over for a nighttime barbecue. My mom and my dad and my sister and I meet in their backyard at like 8 o'clock. This is the first time that I personally meet them. It's just a husband and wife and a teenage boy. I quickly learn the boy's name is Jeremy. The husband seems to be the nicest of them all. There's something cold about the wife, and the son Jeremy seems to have some kind of mental or social issues because he won't talk at all. He constantly looks all over the place, and he seems to be really sad or gloomy. I also catch him staring at me a few times. Each time I grow increasingly uncomfortable around him and try even harder not to look at him anymore. After eating a burger and hot dog each, our parents pretty much talk to his parents. I wait a little bit before sneaking back to our house because I was bored and uncomfortable. The next day on my walk to school, since I live 2 blocks away from the high school, I turned my head around a few houses after passing our neighbor's house and and see someone jump behind a tree as if to be hiding. I turn back in front of me and start to walk faster. I get to the last block before the school and turn around again. This time I see the same person hiding in a bush in front of someone's house. It's Jeremy. I can tell by his long hair, and he's looking right at me. I walk as fast as I can without running, and make it to the school safely a minute later. When I get home that day, I tell my parents, and they go over and talk to the neighbors. When my parents come back to talk to me, I learn from them that Jeremy is apparently not like the other kids, according to his parents word for word. That also seemed to be enough explanation for my parents to tell me to just ignore him, as if him following me to school wasn't an insanely creepy thing to do. Later on, I go outside to sit on the patio and do my homework, and just as Jeremy and his creepiness come to mind, I turn to look at the neighboring house, up at the only window that overlooks our backyard. And there he is. Jeremy is sitting at that window looking at me. But as he notices me, he quickly hides. I run inside and tell my parents, and they once again quote what his parents said and tell me not to worry about him. Later that night, after texting friends and whatnot in bed, I finally put my phone down on the desk and roll on my side to go to sleep. A certain amount of time that I can't remember passes before I hear a click at my window, and then suddenly my window slides open. Without even knowing who's there, I scream at the top of my lungs, and soon my parents come rushing inside, all while I'm pressing up against the wall in shock as someone climbs through my window into my room. My parents turn on the lights, revealing Jeremy holding a large kitchen knife. Everyone screams, including my father, as he comes and grabs me to pull me out of the room. The four of us all rush to the neighbor's house to tell them. The man next door leads us into our own house and grabs his son when he finds him in the living room. He snatches the knife from his hands and tugs him out of the house. My dad sends all of us inside as he stays outside screaming at the man next door. Moments later, he comes back inside and calls the police to get a restraining order. My dad promised those neighbors a living hell if they were not moved out by the next week. The police come and take Jeremy away, probably to some kind of place for people with mental disabilities, not a regular jail. Moving along to a week later, Jeremy didn't stay in that house anymore. We don't know where he stays now, but we've never seen him since. This story was by far the scariest thing to ever happen in my life. I went to a bar with my friends on a Saturday night, and as we usually did, we all got decently intoxicated. The night became a complete blur about an hour after showing up to the bar. I vaguely remember talking to a few guys that came up to me. Didn't remember anything out of the ordinary, though. I live walking distance to the bar we were at that night, so I guess when I got tired or bored, I left. And I do remember walking to my house that night. I think it was when I was starting to sober up a little bit. We always used to leave a key under a flower pot in our stoop, and I always used that key on nights like this so that I wouldn't have to walk around with my keys on me while I'm drunk. I got home, locked the door behind me, and went straight to my room to fall into my bed. I skipped the changing into pajamas and brushing my teeth and whatnot. I did lay there awake with my phone in my hands, texting my friends, seeing if they were still there and making sure they got home okay though. Suddenly, I heard the front door open downstairs. The only thing I was thinking was that it could be my little brother getting home, since he usually got home really late. My best friend texted back asking how I got away from the guy. I replied back, "What guy?" She said the creep that wouldn't stop talking to me at the bar. The bar was such a blur that I didn't remember which specific guy she could be talking about. I heard some noises downstairs. I assumed my brother was making a late-night snack in the kitchen. Then I heard walking up the stairs. My best friend texted me again saying she saw him leave the bar right after me. Now I was still decently drunk, but still, I was starting to become suspicious. Steps came up the stairs outside, then stopped outside my door. Then the door quietly opened. It was dark outside of the room too, so I couldn't see who was standing at my door. I said my brother's name, and then the door shut. But I didn't hear whoever it was walk away, so I was led to believe they were standing outside my door. I immediately texted my brother asking if it was him. Surprisingly, he texted back right away saying, "Was what me? And why do you keep opening the front door?" We live with our mom, She's the only other person in the house, but she was away for the week, so I didn't know what to think, other than it was an intruder. I called the cops without telling my brother, and hearing 911 "What is your emergency?" for the first time in my life really made the situation seem that much more severe. I described what I believed to be a break-in, and as I was on the phone, I leaned over and turned on my bedroom lamp. As the room went from dark to bright, I saw a man standing in the corner of the room by the door. I screamed and shrieked while still on the line with a 911 operator, who kept asking what's wrong. The man in the corner opened the door and fled the scene. I heard him run out the front door. I stayed on the line with the operator, who advised me every move I should make until a cop car actually showed up. I was still intoxicated, so the info I gave on the police report was probably not the most accurate, but I described the man to be mid-20s looking, stocky, full beard, and a short haircut. One of the two officers then lifted his hand, revealing a key he was holding, and said he found that in the front door lock. It was the spare key that we keep under the flower pot. The intruder used it to get in, meaning he followed me home and watched me take the key from under the pot. The officer told me to rest assured he'd be patrolling close around the area all night, and advised my brother and I to keep our doors locked and find a new hiding spot for the key. The next day, besides my hangover, I felt relieved. I told my friends about what happens, and they described everything in detail. That some creepy-looking guy in the bar had been following me all night trying to talk to me every chance he got, and somehow I was oblivious to it. I took a long break from going to bars, and we don't hide a key outside anymore.
Our houses are usually the one place we can call home and feel isolated from the outside world. At least until someone or something from the outside world enters without consent. I've taken 3 very long, supposedly true horror stories that I've either found on the internet or were shared to me and condensed the stories to fit a nicer length video. Number 1. 19-year-old single child Damian Andrews would drive directly from campus after his last class on Friday to his job at a gas station for 6 hours, and after his shift was done, he'd go back to his parents' house. Usually his parents weren't home on weekend nights, as they were the ones who were more often out drinking. Damian pulled into the empty driveway, and as expected, everything was dark in the house. He needed to put his bike that was still in his trunk back into the shed in the backyard, so he removed the bike from the trunk of his truck and rode it down the pavement past the fence and to the shed. When he shut the shed door, he noticed the bathroom light upstairs in the house was on now. He didn't remember noticing the bathroom light being on when he passed the side of the house, so he assumed that maybe one of his parents stayed home for the night. Damian entered the house through the back door, and as he opened his mouth ready to call for one of his parents, something deep down told him not to. Damian went up the half flight of stairs from his den to the midsection of the house. He looked up the short stairway to the upstairs and saw light creeping into the hallway through the closed bathroom door. So somebody was in there. He went upstairs calling out Mom and Dad. There were no responses, but he was in very close range of the bathroom now, which made it odd. He approached the bathroom door, again calling out Mom and Dad. No response. Damian figured maybe his mom was in the bathtub with earbuds in or something. The door was locked, so one of them had to be in there. When the phone rang, he went downstairs to answer it, to find out it was his dad calling, checking in to make sure Damian made it home okay. His dad sounded drunk as usual per Friday nights, so Damian questioned him as to why he left Mom at home as he walked back upstairs to the bathroom door. His dad seemed confused. Then he noticed at the bottom of the door, through the opening, 2 shadow outlines of feet standing by the door. Literally facing the door right on top of it. Then Damian's dad dropped a bomb and told him that his mother was right beside him at the table. He did the only logical thing he could do He ran outside, hung up on his dad, and called the police. When Damien looked up to the bathroom window, he saw the light turn off. 10 minutes of hiding in the bushes later, he heard the police out front, who in the end found nobody in the house. Number 2. The protagonist's name was not given in this story, so I'll refer to him as Ted. Ted was 16 years old and he lived with his dad and brother at their isolated farmhouse. The house was relatively small, with a first floor and a basement. However, it was a huge amount of property with a barn and trees in all directions, providing optimal privacy. There was a long driveway that extended from the side road to the property, which was what Ted was riding down at the moment, returning from his friend's house on his bike. Ted rode into the barn where the family keeps all of the bikes, and then headed for the front door of the house. However, on his way, he noticed the basement doors were wide open. Not seeing any cars in the driveway, Ted assumed it was his little brother who, for whatever reason, left them open. Shutting the doors and stepping down into the basement, Ted quickly realized none of the lights in the basement were on. He called for his little brother Andrew, who answered from upstairs. Andrew came rushing downstairs, turning on the light on the way. The first thing Andrew pointed out was the foul stench in the basement, but Ted said he couldn't notice anything. Ted questioned Andrew as to why he opened the basement doors and then left them that way. His response was, "I didn't." Ted continually accused him of either lying or forgetting, but Andrew swore he hadn't even been in the basement all night. The disturbing thought that it was left unlocked and somebody entered the house came up, and the two subsequently turned the basement practically upside down looking for anyone, turning up nothing. Andrew said he had been in the living room all night and hadn't heard anything, plus he would have noticed if somebody had come upstairs, so Ted felt at ease knowing nobody was in the house. He sat down on the basement couch and started watching TV. That's when he noticed the couch felt kind of weird, less soft than usual. He got up and lifted one of the cushions and screamed. Ted ran upstairs, running into Andrew halfway up, shoving him the rest of the way and locking the basement door behind him. When Ted could finally get some words out, he told Andrew he found a dead body stuffed below the cushions of the basement couch. The body was later determined to be that of their closest neighbor George, whose wife had also gone missing a few days prior. As far as Ted and his family knew at the time of the posting of this story, the culprit was never found. Number 3. Edward Gallo was 24 years old and was living alone in his newly bought home in a rural Virginia area where he would frequently have his girlfriend Sarah stay over on the weekends. One Friday night, after going a whole day without speaking to her, he decided to call her and invite her over. She didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. It was odd for her to not respond to his calls or texts, so he was starting to get worried that maybe she was losing interest. After calling repeatedly with no response, Ed heard one of the doors closing from downstairs. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had come over after all. Ed texted her saying come upstairs. After a few seconds of tinks and thud sounds coming from downstairs, she finally started walking up the stairs. She was walking up really slowly though, as if she were taking 2 steps per stair. Finally, Ed just called out her name in confusion, and the steps stopped. Then Ed's phone began to vibrate, and when he took it out of his pocket, the name on the caller ID was Sarah. He picked up, and immediately Sarah apologized for not being able to get back to him. But he interrupted her and asked her what she's doing on the stairs. There was a long silence, and then she finally said, "What?" Ed asked again. This time, Sarah informed him that she was still in her car on her way home from work. Ed locked the door, and immediately after, the doorknob started turning. All Ed could think to do was to yell, "Get out of here before I call the police." Whoever was on the stairs ran all the way back down and out the front door of the house. Ed looked out the window searching for whoever it was and saw the most disturbing thing he had ever seen. Across the road was a tall man wearing a dress shirt and ripped jean shorts, looking directly at him. And despite how far away he was, Ed could see a smile on the man's face before he turned and ran into the woods to never be seen again.
On March 4th, 2022, these were the texts 21-year-old college student Gavin received after getting home from a night out with friends.
Hey, is this Gavin? Yes, who's this? It's Alex. Where you at? Send your location. I'm at home. What happened to you? What number is this? I'm using my friend's phone. We're stranded at the bar. Can you call us an Uber to your house? What? Why don't you just do it? Dude, my app isn't working. Just figure it out. I don't even know what that means. Just send your address.
Gavin was out with his friends Alex and Omar, and they were last with each other at a bar in Dallas called Parliament. The trio was getting ready to wrap up the night, but Alex stayed behind when he saw other friends at the bar. So Gavin and Omar went home, and about an hour passed with no contact between the three. That was when Gavin received the text from the random number, and as you see, they claimed to be Alex using his friend's phone. Alex had lost his phone, and he was using his friend's phone, who Gavin apparently had never met before. He was asking Gavin to call him an Uber, since according to him, it wasn't working on his phone. Gavin refuses, basically noting how silly that sounds, and tells him to call his own. The conversation picks up here, where Alex agrees to apparently call his own Uber and asks for Gavin's address. Gavin stated that this was around the time he was becoming slightly suspicious, but he still gave his address, however not without making a comment about how he should memorize his address by now. He says he cut him some slack due to the fact that he was drinking. Gavin asked him why he was using his friend's cell phone, to which he got a response that Alex lost his phone. He then lets them know that they're on their way, and when Gavin asks Alex if he knew his friend, he responds, "Nah, he's cool though." 10 minutes later, the number sends a text that truly starts to make the conversation suspicious. "Can we just come in through the front door when we get there?" As if asking Gavin to leave the door unlocked. It was at this moment that he started to question everything about the interaction, from the first text being, "Hey, is this Gavin?" to the asking Gavin to call them an Uber, to now the leaving the door unlocked. He tried to call the number, but it rang and went to voicemail. He then tried to text and call Alex's number repeatedly, but it would just keep going to voicemail, and the text would just say delivered. Gavin stopped answering this foreign number now, and called his friend Omar to ask him if he'd heard anything from Alex, to which Omar said he had not. After reading Omar all of the texts, Omar agreed something was off. They looked to call the bar Parliament, but there was no number listed online to call. Around this time, the number texted Gavin again, saying, "We're here, open the door." Gavin went to his door and looked through the peephole of the door. There was no one in immediate view though, which maybe at first would have implied it was all a prank. But when there was a knock at the door, Gavin checked the peephole again. There was still no one on the other side. Reality of the situation was setting in now for Gavin, as this was no longer just texts on a screen. Someone was actually on the other side of his door. So he asks, "Who is this?" Straight to the point. They reply with simply, "LOL." Gavin asks again, "Who is this?" And they reply, "Open the door." So instead of answering again, Gavin calls the police. The knocking persists for a few minutes, in long intervals. Then it stops for good when the person or people on the other end realize Gavin was onto them. Gavin went on to DM one of Alex's friends who he was hanging out with after he and Omar left. And almost instantly, the friend DM'd him back explaining that he, Alex, and their other friend were jumped by a big group of men in the street. They were all badly injured and went to the hospital. Alex's phone had been stolen, while one of his friend's wallets and phone was stolen. Alex not having a password on his phone meant all of his info and conversations were accessible. Alex's friend helped him in getting his phone locked. The police report that Gavin would get from the police who came to his house would later help Alex in getting his service provider to replace his stolen phone for him. The lack of a password on the phone meant the thieves were able to gain information such as Alex and Gavin's conversation, where they would deduce that Gavin was home alone and an easy target. So if Gavin didn't catch on to the suspicious situation, he may have been opening his door to 2 or more people ready to attack him too and rob his house. The phone number that was being used to text Gavin turned out to be another stolen phone, therefore didn't help in finding the thief. The case regarding finding the thieves and assaulters remains open. These texts were received by an anonymous viewer, from his dad's ex-girlfriend, who will be named Kathy for the purpose of this recounting. The viewer will be called Rob. The reason Rob's dad ended things with Kathy was because of her increasingly erratic and delusional tendencies. Her mental health was declining for unknown reasons. Rob's dad was dating Kathy for about half a year, and Rob's grandparents both passed away during that time. Rob's dad wasn't very open at first about how Kathy would start acting all paranoid about his son's dead grandparents, about how she believed they placed a curse on her. Rob's dad cut ties with Kathy when the delusions got too ridiculous. Rob was left in the dark for the longest time about Kathy's delusions though, presumably out of embarrassment for having spent so much time with a supposed nutjob. It wasn't long after his father's breakup with Kathy that Rob would receive texts from her himself. When her attempts at reaching his father no longer worked, she clearly went to him instead. Kathy texted Rob, "Hello sweetie, I need your help." Rob replied with, "What? What's up?" "Your father's parents put a curse on me. I need you to tell me the cemetery and plot number they were buried at." "What do you mean they put a curse on you?" "I keep hearing their voices and having bad premonitions. I know it sounds crazy, but I need it to stop." Of course, being told by somebody that they were hearing your dead grandparents' voices would be a clear indication that the person is completely unhinged. So Rob went to show his dad the texts. His dad laughed and told him to just ignore her. Rob says that instead of blocking her though, he just let her continue to text him to see how crazy her texts would get. She followed up later that night with, "I need to exhume their grave. If you help me out, I will sleep with you. I know you've always checked me out whenever I was in your dad's house." Rob still didn't answer, and the next day, her text got a little more graphic. Rob showed these texts to his dad, and this time his dad was not amused. He called Kathy and screamed that he would be getting a restraining order if she didn't stop. When he hung up, she kept trying to call until he ended up blocking her number. That same night, while Rob's dad was asleep, Rob was still in his den watching a show when he heard the doorknob jiggling. He went to look through the glass atop the door and saw Kathy fiddling with a knife in the key slot of the doorknob. She looked up at him and through the glass and started pleading with him to let her in. Rob called for his dad, and she started to scream no. When his dad came to the door, he screamed at her and then went to call the cops. Kathy would scream back constant obscenities and threats, waving her knife in the air. She didn't leave, and police arrived to her still at the door with knife in hand. Based on her coming to their house with a weapon and not leaving when asked, she was arrested, and Rob's dad filed for a restraining order against her. Clearly, Kathy was more than just delusional and was starting to suffer from some sort of mental illness, such as paranoid disorder. This does not mean she wasn't a danger to others though, as well as herself, evident by the knife she brought to their house and attempting to break into their house. Luckily, no one was hurt. An 18-year-old girl named Leanna, living in Hoboken, New Jersey, was at a local bar with her friend on a Saturday. That's when she got a notification that someone was trying to send her a message on Instagram. Usually people disregard these message requests, as they're messages from people you don't follow back on Instagram. In a girl's shoes, those message requests are 9 times out of 10 men sending them flirtatious and often creepy messages. A lot of people don't ever check these messages, but sometimes when you get that notification that someone sent you a message request, curiosity gets the better of you. In this case, Leanna opened the DM, and it was from some random account with no profile picture and no followers, asking her if she was at McSwiggin's, a local bar in Hoboken. Right away, this is cause for alarm, of course, because this would be coming from someone who knew where she was at that exact moment, someone intentionally using a fake Instagram account. Leanna follows with, "Yes, who's this? You look good in that pink top. Aren't you 18 though? Shouldn't be in a bar. I won't tell anyone though. Who is this? Just a guy who thinks you're really attractive." By this point, Leanna assumes it's a prank by someone she knows, and asks who's messing with her. The person replies it's neither of the names she just mentioned. Upon Leanna asking for a selfie, the person replies, "Can't." The girls look around the bar for anybody that could be alone, mainly an older, predatory-looking man. They saw a few men that appeared to be alone sitting at the bar. None of them were eyeing the girls, though. That's when she says, "K, bye, we're leaving." Moderately uncomfortable, the two girls leave the crowded bar and start walking. They go to another bar nearby, which is far less crowded than the first. They sit at the bar and order a few drinks, looking for young guys to talk to. When Leanna's phone vibrates again, and she gets another creepy message from the person. It said, "This is my favorite bar, good choice." Leanna shows her friend the message, and then the two start looking around the bar for someone who could be sending the messages. And as if he was looking to be found out, Leanna saw a man sitting on the bar stool closest to the door, looking at her with a blank, wide-eyed expression. She says the best way she could describe his appearance was the killer from the movie The Lovely Bones, mainly because of his glasses, hair, and mustache. They made extended eye contact, to the point that it seemed the man was outwardly trying to be creepy, making it obvious who he was. The girls asked the bartender for help. They showed him the DM she was getting and then pointed at the man, who in response to being pointed at, started looking around the room, in any direction but towards the girls. The bartender went over and told the guy in a loud, commanding voice to leave the bar without question, threatening to kick his ass if he didn't leave the girls alone. The man left the establishment, surely feeling at least some sense of embarrassment, as anyone would. Leanna and her friends stayed at the bar for about half an hour, only to avoid running into the man outside. But Leanna says their mood to stay out was gone after that creepy encounter, and they just wanted to know who that was, or how he knew Leanna and where she was at that moment. When the girls left, they began walking home. They were on 2nd Street, a quiet one-way road, especially at the hour they were walking. They were being mindful of their surroundings, making sure they weren't being followed. But even when you think you're aware of your surroundings, the unexpected can always happen. Leanna and her friend heard running footsteps from behind them out of the blue, and there was no time to react before the man grabs Leanna with one arm around her face and mouth and the other around her waist. He picked her up as she tried to scream and fight, and of course her friend did the screaming for her, and continued to hit at the man. The commotion caught the attention of people from around the corner, and a few people came to the scene. The man released his grip from the girl and walked away quickly. Nobody went after the man. The girls called the police there on the spot. Leanna showed the police the DMs, and 2 witnesses backed up their story as well. A police report was made and a case was opened to find the man in question. Leanna would speak to detectives at her home a few days later, who gathered all the information she could give. They would later use the surveillance footage from the 2 bars, but the police have not yet been able to match the man seen in the footage to anybody. As a precaution, she still has her Instagram disabled to this day. If someone is dedicated enough, they can find someone through their Instagram by keeping track of what places they go to in their pictures, what school they go to, and who they associate with. That's why it often is a good idea to keep your Instagram private. When me and my troublemaking friends were 13 years old, one of the many rowdy and mischievous things we would do would be Saturday night ding-dong ditch sessions. 10 years ago, we all lived on the same block in a typical suburban neighborhood. At the time, there were a lot less houses and more woods though. I'm going to make up names for my friends for the case of this story. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Either Mark or James were usually the ones to go up to the houses and ring the bells. Matt and I, on the other hand, would usually find hiding spots right away. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. I remember all of the men who answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They'd step out onto the stoop, 1 or 2 would yell something, and then they'd walk back inside. For a couple of houses, we'd ring the bell again for a better reaction. One guy yelled he was calling the cops the second time, so when he shut his door, we all booked it down the street and went to the next block over. As I mentioned, 10 years ago in this neighborhood, there were patches of wood sitting where houses sit today. On the next block over, there were a few patches of wood surrounding some of the houses, and the houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt. The first house on the block was across the street from a patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was kind of run down looking, tall grass, a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway, and overall just a small house. Mark went up to ring the bell. He barely had time to make it across the street before the door opened. It was another man to answer the door. This guy really big, about 6 foot and stocky build. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked around his whole front yard checking the bushes, yelling threats. We all laughed as we always did. Eventually, he finally went back inside. Mark waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the stoop to ring the bell again. I didn't envy him with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's bell again.
Mark knew he probably didn't have as much time, so he ran to the side of the house and out of sight. The door opened much quicker this time, and this time the man came out with a rifle in his hand. We all looked at each other, simultaneously going, "Oh shit," under our breath. The man checked all the places he checked before, and then a few extra places this time, like behind his car, behind a couple trees, and then he walked to the center of his lawn and just stood there, as if he were thinking. He looked around, and then his head stopped as he was facing us in the woods. Me, Matt, and James looked at each other. We ducked lower in hopes that he didn't see us. After 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man went back into his home. And then, we saw him appear at his front window, standing still like a statue, looking in our direction in the woods once again. We saw Mark creeping back over to the man's front door, but there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell anything. Mark rang the bell once again and ran for it. The man didn't move though, at least not for another minute. Then he turned and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark again, but we were still too nervous to move or say anything. The next thing I remember, we heard Mark's voice from across the street yelling, "Run." We didn't understand until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street with his rifle in hand, pointed at us. We ran like little prey from a predator to Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for blocks until we were sure we lost him. Mark explained that he yelled when he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or any of what happened. We just told a few friends and that was it. Luckily the house was many blocks from us, so we never really had to pass it again. I lived in a house from hell for a couple of weeks. I was a college student and my parents were paying for a house for me to live in. I'm spoiled, I know. Well, the house was modest, nothing fancy or huge, and I was happy with it. Well, for the first few days anyway. Then things quickly started getting strange. On a rainy Saturday with nothing to do, I was watching TV for a few hours. That was when I heard a scrape on my living room floor. I looked around the room thinking an animal got into the house or something. I sat back down and resumed watching TV. That was the first weird occurrence. The rain continued throughout the rest of the day and into the night, which made for an excuse to not go out. I stayed in watching more TV in the living room. I perked up when I thought I heard something from the kitchen. Laughably, I took a pillow with me as, I guess, some sort of weapon and walked over to the kitchen doorway. There, in the middle of the dark kitchen, was a box of Cheerios on the floor, spilling out hundreds of the tiny O's. I had no idea how that could have happened. Nevertheless, I dropped the pillow and began cleaning up the Cheerios off the floor. As I was doing so, I heard a creak, like the sound weak areas of a wood floor make when someone steps on them. It was by the kitchen table. I looked up, but nobody was there. I knew I was going crazy now. Every little sound must have been making me paranoid. I cleaned the Cheerios and went back to watching TV. The thunder outside was getting louder as the bulk of the storm seemed to be passing overhead. Yet I found it to be strangely relaxing. That was the last thing I remember, appreciating the sound of the storm outside, before waking up from what seemed to be an hour-long doze. The TV was still on, but that wasn't what woke me. I remember believing I woke up to a bang or thud from downstairs. Regardless, I turned off the TV and marched upstairs to bed. The next day was normal, as was the day after that. It wasn't until the next gray, rainy day that strange things started happening again. I woke up in my bed that morning feeling like I had been drinking all night the night before. I felt sicker than I'd ever felt with any hangover before. I didn't do much walking around that day, The gloomy dark weather only made me more bedridden. I left the TV in my bedroom on all day just as background noise, with a garbage pail by my side in case I had to puke. At midday, I muted the TV after hearing sounds coming from above me. The attic. The attic door was actually in my bedroom, and most of the attic was built over that bedroom. It wasn't just one thud I heard, it was 3 or 4. I managed to get out of bed, despite the fact that every time I moved I wanted to puke. I pulled the string to the attic door down, took one of my old baseball bats with me, and climbed up the steps. I pulled the light switch down to light up the attic. There were a few old boxes that must have belonged to the previous owners scattered about, but I couldn't see any living things to produce those noises. I climbed back down quickly because I was kind of scared of that attic. There were no more noises. Until that night. I woke up to, at first, what I thought was thunder, still feeling a bit sick. The familiar sound of a thud from up in the attic gave me chills. I pulled the string to the attic door back down, took my baseball bat once again, and climbed up the stairs. I made myself angry and screamed in the most intimidating voice I could, but before I could turn the light on, I heard the sound of a child giggling in the pitch-black attic. Words cannot describe the feeling of weightlessness, the feeling of my insides dropping inside of my body, the fear that I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe what I felt at that moment. I was out of that house so fast I don't even remember running. I called my dad in the cold rain and asked him to pick me up. I explained everything the best I could. My parents saw how emotional I was about this, and in a weird sense, I think they believed me. I packed all of my things up with my parents the next day, and moved back home. To this day, I'm convinced what I experienced in that house was completely paranormal. I used to work as a maid for some old lady for a couple of weeks when I was 20. She had a really big yet old house on a property that could have been beautiful if she had actually taken care of it. She had 2 acres of land surrounded by woods in 3 directions and the road on the other. The house itself was ancient, mostly made of wood, and the interior was really dark. She would often keep the blinds shut in some rooms for reasons I didn't understand. I would sometimes open the blinds to let some sunlight in, only to find that she'd have shut them by the next time I entered the room. She lit some rooms by candle, which made the house seem even more prehistoric from the inside. To top it off, the wood floors were creaky as hell just about everywhere in the house. The woman's name was Mel. She was around 70 years old. The kind of work Mel would have me do would be mostly physical stuff that she couldn't do very well anymore, like sweeping, dusting, cleaning dishes, doing laundry, sorting mail, and other things of that sort. One weekend, Mel asked me to sleep there for a night or 2. The house had like 4 bedrooms, yet she lived alone, so it wasn't an issue. Well, this takes place over the course of a Friday, and technically a Saturday as well. I arrived as per usual on Friday, speaking very few words to Mel. I dropped my backpack full of my clothes and cosmetics onto the bed in the bedroom that I was going to be sleeping in. As I turned to the door, I saw Mel standing by the doorway. She had a creepy way about her, and this entrance was no exception. She didn't say hello, which wasn't as weird as it sounds. She just instructed me to clean the bedroom right away. After that, she just told me to simply straighten up the whole house, and then she went upstairs. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, but I would occasionally hear her walking around upstairs in her bedroom. It was weird, she would seem to walk back and forth. There were no TVs in this house, so I didn't know what she could have been doing. One thing that I found bizarre was how protective she was of her basement. She made it clear it was completely off limits and she didn't want me going down there. Nighttime came and I went to bed early. This was before smartphones were a thing, so I didn't even know what time it was. It was probably 9 or 10 o'clock though. For the first few hours, everything was peaceful. However, I still had trouble falling asleep given that it was the most uncomfortable bed I'd ever been in. It felt like hours later that I started hearing footsteps outside my room on the creaky floors. It sounded like Mel was passing my room really slowly. Maybe she was just going to the bathroom. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps again, but then she stopped outside my door this time. I sat up and listened. I could hear the creaking from behind the door of Mel standing there, and it was starting to creep me out. She finally walked away. I heard her go down the stairs, and then I heard a door open and close from downstairs. I had a feeling it was the basement door. It was a while later that I heard the door open and close again, and then heavy, slow footsteps coming up the creaky stairs. The footsteps once again came to my door, then stopped. I sat up once again to listen, and I could hear creaks of pressure on the floor outside the door, and then I heard the doorknob start to turn. I laid back down and pulled the sheets over me and pretended to be asleep. I heard Mel take a few steps into the room, pause, and then leave. She went back to her room and shut the door. I was a bit disturbed. This was very bizarre behavior. I waited about half an hour before deciding I had to see what was in that basement. I got out of the rickety bed, tiptoed to the door, and then tiptoed down the stairs the best I could. I opened the heavy basement door, flipped on the lights, and crept down the stairs. I made it to the bottom step and held in the urge to scream. There were 2 old wooden chairs dead center in the basement, and there were 2 of what I could only describe as decaying corpses with wigs on them sitting in them. The sight of a bug crawling on one of them made me want to puke even more. I brought myself to walk deeper into the basement, closer to the corpses. I had to make sure they were real. Both of the corpses had men's wigs on them. The bigger of the 2 also had a beret on. I don't know much about corpses or their rate of decaying, but I'd say these corpses were both almost a year old. I felt like my heart stopped momentarily when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs on the first floor. I couldn't make it to the light switch. I had no time. I hid behind one of the couches in the basement as I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down one creaky stair at a time. I had my hands covering my mouth as I heard Mel reach the last stair. I heard her whisper my name. For half a second, I looked around the couch and saw Mel halfway across the basement already with a big kitchen knife in her hand. I knew she would be too slow to catch me, so I ran for it to the stairs. She screamed my name and followed as fast as she could. When I made it to the first floor of the house, I ran upstairs to the bedroom I was sleeping in to grab my backpack. By the time I ran back downstairs, Mel was at the top basement step. I ran out the front door and to my car. I turned it on, caught my breath, looked to the front door of the big old house, and saw Mel standing there. I drove off the huge property and down the road, making it back home within 10 minutes. Fortunately, I never gave Mel any of my information, such as my address or my phone number, so she was never able to contact me again. If I had to guess, I'd say one of those corpses belonged to her dead husband that she'd mentioned twice to me. As for the other, smaller corpse, I have no idea, but regardless, it was a disturbing scene to witness, and something was way off about that woman.
You can feel comfort in storing your private belongings inside lockers and other storage devices. However, sometimes the private belongings found inside these storage devices are rather strange and disturbing.
Number 10.
The only time it's acceptable to keep around a headless doll is the 5 minutes between the dog ripping the head off and you discovering it. When someone stores a headless doll among knives, it's most likely a problem. Robert Dewey Hoskins, who was rearrested after escaping from a mental hospital in February of 2012, was convicted of threatening to murder Madonna, and that headless baby doll was found in his storage unit in Long Beach. LA Weekly reports on the 10 creepiest items found in the Madonna stalker's storage unit. Besides the headless baby doll and dozens of knives, Hoskins kept a very scary clown mask, a sumo wrestler baby doll, a Barbie backpack, and so much more.
Number 9.
A married couple with 2 kids made a horrific discovery when the mother, Mrs. Copeland, found a safe in her 10-year-old son's room. When questioned about where he got it and its contents, he simply pleaded the fifth. Both parents were unable to get any info out of their son. Eventually, Mr. Copeland was able to pry the safe open and was shocked at what he found inside. The head of their dog that had recently passed and was buried in their yard was stuffed into the safe. Blood poured out of the box as Mr. Copeland screamed in horror. Their son said he loved that dog so much that he wanted to have a part of her forever, so he dug up the body, cut off its head with a tiny kitchen knife, and stuffed it in the safe that was found by the mother later on that same day.
Number 8.
Some people like to take their work home with them, but Dr. Michael Birkland, a former medical examiner, took his work to a storage unit in Pensacola. And when I say work, I'm talking about body parts for more than 100 people. All this creepiness was discovered in August 2012 when some poor soul bought the contents of Dr. Birkland's unit at a storage auction. It seems that Dr. Birkland's hobby included the storing of 10 brains as well as other body parts like lungs, hearts, and tissue samples. Dr. Birkland was thrifty as well as creepy, keeping a heart stored in a styrofoam cup. Police noted that formaldehyde was leaking from the cracked lid. The body parts, which were harvested during private autopsies performed inside funeral homes in Florida, were also found inside Tupperware containers, trash bags, and specimen cups. Interestingly, Dr. Birkland was fired from his job as a medical examiner in 2003 for failing to complete autopsy reports in a timely manner and for keeping a big backlog of cases.
Number 7.
Unit B8 in U-Store Self-Storage in Clearwater, Florida, held something that couldn't be auctioned off when the family fell behind on payments in January of 2012. When the storage facility manager told the family that the contents were going to be sold, the truth came out. Among the banana boxes and old TVs rested the grandma's skeletal remains. Authorities identified the grandma as Anne Bunch, born on January 1st, 1900. Since the woman's death in 1995, her remains had been stored inside a painted blue coffin in a storage unit that wasn't air-conditioned. For 17 years, her remains rested inside a warm storage unit. The body had been properly prepared for burial by a funeral home in Alabama, which explains the lack of odor.
Number 6.
A lot of people refuse to go to public pools, and maybe this will be one more reason. An elderly man named Jacob Pastor, who swam in a public pool in Colorado, used the same locker in the changing room every time he visited. A lot of the lockers went unused, as most people didn't even need to use them, and it wasn't a very crowded pool to begin with. One unfortunate day, however, perhaps he had tired himself out a little too much and opened the wrong locker, the one right next to his usual one. The skeletal remains of a human fell out from the locker almost as if it were tackling him to the ground. By the looks of it, the body that once was had been in there for years, as it was fully decomposed. It looked as though somebody had been forcefully jammed in there, or perhaps they simply got stuck in there themselves. That mystery will remain unsolved.
Number 5.
Imager user Oldswagen is a reformed thief who earns money on the side by unlocking safes for people, but little did he know that this job could lead to him helping solve a vile crime. A landlord contacted the lockmaster to help him bust into a safe that one of his tenants had left behind, but neither of them were prepared for what was lurking inside. Once Oldswagen had disabled the lock by hot wiring it, the safe swung open and revealed that things would have gone very differently if he had used an acetylene torch to bust through the door, because inside, as pictured, they found a live grenade. Unfortunately, the live grenade was one of the more innocent items concealed within the safe's near-impenetrable metal walls. The SD cards pictured were all filled with child pornography, and the journal was so depraved that Oldswagen wrote, "I thumbed through it, and I won't tell you what was in it so that you could actually sleep tonight." The authorities were informed of the upsetting material, and all the items pictured were confiscated to help find the perpetrator, who is believed to have been running a child pornography ring.
Number 4.
In Fort Collins, Colorado, 1987, a school locker was searched after the murder of a local girl named Peggy Hetrick, and the police never forgot what they found. Timothy Lee Masters' locker was crammed full of over 2,200 pages of violent writings and horrific drawings of mutilated bodies, with some of them resembling the scene where Hetrick was murdered. The 15-year-old pupil was found guilty at trial and sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was eventually acquitted in 2008 when advances in forensic science cleared him of acting out his sick fantasies in real life. Peggy Hetrick's killer has never been caught. Number 3. When Mr. Shannon Wisnett bought a barbecue smoker from an auction storage unit, it contained a human leg. The severed limb was wrapped in tinfoil, but when police traced its owner, the leg's origins turned out to be distinctly less murderous than they were expecting. The former owner of the storage unit, Mr. John Wood, was involved in a plane crash in 2004. That meant his leg had to be amputated below the knee. He opted to keep the limb so he could be buried with it, but somehow forgot that he had put it in storage. Number 2. When she was refurbishing a derelict home, Ann Contola discovered a wall safe hidden behind the plasterwork. Convinced it might hold something of value, she called the locksmith to crack it open. But instead of riches, she was greeted with a handful of human teeth. Number 1. Reddit user by the name of Lumberjack found a bizarre hidden crawlspace in his house, but it was the locked safe within that contained the most spine-chilling material. The tiny place designed to fit a water heater was carpeted and led to a mysterious black door that was locked. In order to be able to sleep in the house ever again, Lumberjack broke through the door and was greeted by a black sentry safe that was looming in the corner. When the safe was opened, it contained numerous VHS tapes that didn't seem to contain innocent home movies. "No, no, no, no" could be found written on one of the tapes. As if that weren't bad enough, there was also a chilling note in ominous dripping black ink, saying, "Save yourself." 8 months ago, Lumberjack told the Reddit community that he had turned in the tapes to the police.